Redfall's terrible.
Isn't that the guy who made all the videos about arcane games?
Where's Duncan's video on
It's
Redfall?
the worst game of the year.
I wonder what he thought of Redfall. Do you think he liked
Where's
Redfall?
Game Coping's video on Redfall?
It's the worst game ever made. He's an arcane stan.
You've made videos about every arcane
like
game.
Redfall. I mean, you covered all of the arcane games before,
I
right?
plan to make a video all about
So you should
Redfall
probably
and how
jump
good
on
it
that
is. Why
bandwagon
hasn't he made a
of
video
hate.
about Redfall
Come
yet?
on, sell out.
Ooh, Harvey Smith, retweet my
There's
video
no
again.
way he's going to talk about how bad Redfall is. He loves Arcane. It's his favorite studio.
Baby loves Redfall.
Tear your favorite studio to
Oh,
shreds.
it looks like he's going to speak. I think he's going to say something about Redfall.
Borderlands 2 is probably up there with my favorite co-op games of all time. I loved the pre-sequel, and the first game was just such a breath of fresh air that it reimagined what a first-person shooter could be. Borderlands 3 reviewed pretty well, and sold just as well as you'd expect a big household name franchise to sell. But personally, something was missing. Borderlands isn't exactly a series that changes much from game to game, and I think a lot of that is to do with how much of a trendsetter it was when the first game released. Borderlands was a fresh take on the first-person shooter that flipped so many of the tropes of the genre on their head. Where gritty warfare and overly serious campaigns were often king, everything about Borderlands was coated in this layer of self-awareness that made a mockery of its rivals. But that extended to gameplay too, because in a time filled with gaming protagonists who relied on one singular mechanic or gadget, Borderlands made it fun to ditch your favorite weapon every hour or so as you found newer, better ways to play. Because of all that, Borderlands was a massive success, so much so that it pretty much single-handedly spawned the modern looter shooter. But after almost 10 years of Borderlands being on the shelves, it started to suffer from its inability to change. It went from outlier in the FPS genre to status quo of a new one, because dozens of imitators had arrived on the scene, so by the time Borderlands 3 was released, that self-awareness, that distinct, fresh feeling, none of it quite hit home anymore. I really wasn't a fan of Borderlands 3. It had lost the series' charm, the characters weren't fun like they had been in previous games, and even though there was a massive variety of weaponry to use, none of it felt quite as enjoyable or as well thought out as the weaponry in the pre-sequel. And that isn't even mentioning the controversies surrounding Gearbox's studio head Randy Pitchford when the game released. Every immature joke didn't land with the whimsical charm it did in Borderlands 2, it felt like Randy Pitchford enabling his own unprofessional sense of humour.
Recruit, get that gate open! That's an order from your superior officer!
Honestly, I just didn't vibe with Borderlands 3 at all, and seriously, I questioned whether I would ever play a Borderlands game again.
This world is full of adventures. You only keep your eyes and your heart ever open to its wonder. Now, bid me adieu, fair squire. I must away with a swiftness.
Perhaps I misjudged you. I've learned much in my short time squiring for you. Fare thee well, Ron.
Adventure!
I wonder if he's all right.
But then came Tiny Tina's Wonderlands, the next half-step game that lay somewhere between DLC expansion and mainline installment. I didn't even particularly want to like this game, but somehow it's come out of nowhere and utterly redeemed the Borderlands franchise for me. In fact, I'll go a step further than that. It's shown me that not all looter shooters today have to be safe, boring, and dull. Let's look at why. I'm trying to find a way to talk about Redfall without contributing to the negative press around Arcane, because I don't really think it's fair that the blame is kind of lying with them, even though it's clearly Microsoft at fault for the fact that that game is a complete train wreck. And I feel like Tiny Tina's Wonderlands and Redfall are kind of two sides of the same coin, almost. It's just that I don't really know how... I don't really know what to... Tiny Tina's Wonderlands is a game within a game. This universe's version of Dungeons & Dragons is called Bunkers and Badasses, and the entire game takes place on the tabletop of Tiny Tina, one of the franchise's most infamous quest givers. With her explosive imagination, Tiny Tina is running the show here as a DM, unraveling this adventure from what feels like only one step ahead of the player.
Crabbity, 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 crab, 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 crab.
What?
Yeah, so, I was playtesting my campaign, and in this part of the quest, I had players shoot the sun to get the labyrinth key, but it just wasn't working because nobody thought to look up, but then I got sleepy and I forgot to replace the task.
Well, what the hell are we supposed to do now?
Hey baby, it's cool, it's all good. I can think on my feet.
It might not seem like much, but it's amazing what this tiny shift does to the entire Borderlands formula, because all of a sudden you realize that that all-important self-aware streak that I felt Borderlands 3 lost is back in spades here. Thanks to this change-up, Wonderlands isn't making comment on the FPS genre that's almost non-existent now, and it isn't just being another bland co-op multiplayer shooter. In Tiny Tina's Wonderlands, Gearbox is making comment on predictable co-op shooters, but it's doing it through the vehicle of unpredictable tabletop RPGs. Tiny Tina narrates so much of this game as though it's being pulled together as you play, or even improvised completely. That narration has massive implications on the writing of the game. Gags don't feel immature and in bad taste anymore, they feel authentic and scrappy. A signature part of playing Borderlands missions is that they often subvert your expectations somehow. There's always a character twist or an ending which feels totally out of left field compared to equivalent quests in other games. Tragically, that isn't really something I remember from Borderlands 3, but it's Tiny Tina's bread and butter.
Hear me, wicked Solissa. It is I, the undefeated monster slayer, Garrett of Trivia. Hear my name well, for it will be the last thing you hear.
Wow, you're really as stupid as we'd hoped. Now die, fool!
I am your doom. I am your end. And when you are slain, all
On another note, this game-within-a-game approach moves Borderlands from its typical sci-fi space adventure setting into one of high fantasy, which helps to give things a really fresh feel again. Weapons have all the capitalist brand names we know from Pandora, but they're now repurposed into fantasy versions of themselves. Pistols are crossbows, your throwables are now spells, and your character's ultimates are in keeping with a D&D character's class. Tiny Tina's Wonderlands rediscovered that self-aware mojo that Borderlands 3 lost, and it was through a simple change-up I'm fairly sure any other studio wouldn't go near. The result is maybe some of the most fun I've had with the franchise to date. A massive part of any looter shooter is the loot. Borderlands 3 made such a big deal of how it would have millions of potential guns because all the RNG in the world had gone into the development of the game. Alt-fire modes were now a main feature, meaning every gun would have more than one use case.
Try it out. Follow me, recruit.
I have no idea how much this has been dialed up or scaled back in Tiny Tina's Wonderlands, but all of these weapons, spells, and loot all feels worth having, and in Borderlands 3 I just didn't feel that that was the case. This is central to Borderlands. The entire plot of the first game revolves around hunting for the vault and the loot that lies therein. But if there's anything the first two games teach you, it's that the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow isn't as good as the trail of breadcrumbs that led you to it. Well, actually, I suppose the rainbow is the trail. So there isn't really a trail of breadcrumbs on a rainbow because it's a rainbow. So the trail of breadcrumbs isn't actually it's the rainbow itself is the trail of breadcrumbs. Looting new weapons every half hour feels like a massive pain in the ass if the UI isn't usable, and you don't want to spend half the game comparing weapon stats if there's no distinct use or feel for each new weapon. An important aspect of weapon looting in OG Borderlands was about what was more fun to use, not always what was better on paper. In Borderlands 3, I wanted to spend as little time in the inventory as possible, because whenever I opened it, the game would drop to 2 FPS and give me a migraine. So unless the stats of a new weapon were a clean swoop of green, I would never swap weapon. But in Wonderlands, I look at a spell and go, my current spell is worse in almost every way on paper than this new one, but my current spell lets me drop a giant fireball on my enemies and spreads out its slightly worse damage on a crowd of enemies. I wonder which one I should...
Fireball it is!
Hold on to something!
Playing Tiny Tina's Wonderlands actually feels like playing again, and that element of fun mixed with the power trip when a build is working is still second to none in this genre. Borderlands is known for its very distinctive art style. Those thick outlines and cel-shaded colours are iconic at this point, and especially in the franchise's early days, this art style really represented the fresh direction Gearbox was taking, because it had just never been done before. But there was a problem with this art style, because it wasn't exactly pushing boundaries, and it didn't leave much room to grow as the series went on. Borderlands 3 managed to update the look with higher fidelity textures, keeping that iconic style while bringing it forward to what was, at the time, next-gen graphics. But this is something I felt Borderlands 3 completely face-planted on. I mean, yes, it looked better, but it felt like there was little to no ambition in creating environments that were interesting to look at, let alone explore. Hard cut to Tiny Tina's Wonderlands, and you can notice an immediate boost in colour, contrast, and ambitious environments. Making video game biomes original these days is not an easy task. I mean, pretty much everything has already been done, and if you're building a multiplayer looter shooter, you can bet that players aren't exactly going to stop and smell the roses. They'll be too busy focusing on gameplay, upgrades, and conversations with friends. Hell, a lot of these games use procedural generation for a reason. Wonderlands feels like it's making comment on those rivals though, because its levels are over the top and fantastical to an extent they just don't even need to be. These levels make me want to stop and pick up new side quests and explore, because they're interesting to look at. In today's overly saturated games as a service market, Tiny Tina's Wonderlands is a breath of fresh air. It's not only redeemed Borderlands for me as a franchise, but it has set the bar for looter shooters going forward. Tiny Tina's Wonderlands is everything to the Borderlands franchise that Redfall could have been to the entire looter shooter genre. Thank you for watching, and tune in next time.